Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Thomas Behrens, and I welcome you all on behalf of the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung in Poland. Today, we will discuss the Conference on the Future of Europe, a major, first-of-its-kind debate forum for citizens of the European Union. Launched on the 9th of May last year, the anniversary of the famous Schuman Declaration in 1950, the conference is an interinstitutional effort of the European Commission, Parliament and Council. It works as a bottom-up exercise, and it has triggered transnational reflections on European challenges and priorities. The debate was conducted with different actors at all levels of European, national and regional and local government, using innovative formats and addressing issues in different policy areas. We will discuss it in the general process, and we will discuss the national perspectives seen from Poland and from Germany. But why are we talking about this topic today? Firstly, because the final report of the conference will be presented in the early May, exactly 1 year after the kickoff. And secondly, because European integration is one of the key areas in work of the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung in general. But finally, because Russia's war against our neighbors in Ukraine, which violates international law and makes us all sad and concerned these days, shows one thing clearly: the debate in the European Union about our common values, about our aspirations and challenges is more necessary than ever. For this debate, we have one brilliant experts from politics and science, from Germany and from Poland. So the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung would like to thank you all for your open willingness to join us today. In Brussels, as you can see on the big screen, we are pleased to welcome Professor Dr. Danuta Hübner. As you all know, she is a highly respected member of the European Parliament since 2009, and she was the first Polish commissioner responsible for regional policy, 2004 to 2009. Furthermore, she is a former Minister for European Affairs in the government of Prime Minister Leszek Miller and was at that time the representative of the government of Poland to the Convention of the Future of Europe. So, a warm welcome to Professor Hübner. We are really delighted to have you with us. Can you listen to me? Yes. Everything is fine, yeah?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
In Luxembourg, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Renata Miękowska-Norkiene. She's an assistant professor at the Faculty of Political Science and International Studies here at the University in Warsaw. Being a member of Team Europe, a group of experts appointed by the representation of the European Commission in Poland, she is specialized in European Union policies and European integration. Hello to Luxembourg.
Hello. Good afternoon.
And in Berlin, we welcome Dr. Nikolai von Ondarza. He is the head of the research division EU Europe at the German Institute for National and International and Security Affairs, Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik in Berlin. Willkommen, Herr Dr. von Ondarza.
Great to be here.
And last but not least, here in Warsaw, with me in the studio, on my right side, we welcome Dr. Anna Wojciuk. She is also an associate professor at the Faculty of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Warsaw. She is also a member of the executive board of the non-partisan initiative, The Decentralized Republic, a project that aims at reforming Poland's highly dysfunctional governance system. And she recently published an article in the Polish newspaper Rzeczpospolita entitled Conference on the Future of Europe, The Forgotten Debate. Dzień dobry, pani profesor.
Dzień dobry, bardzo dziękuję za zaproszenie.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us proceed as follows. First, I'd like to take a look back at the origins and the kickoff of the Conference on the Future of Europe. That's why we ask, what is the historical dimension of the project? What makes the structure of the conference so special? And what were the expectations last year in Brussels, in Berlin, and in Warsaw. Then in the second step, we will focus on the content and on the priorities of the conference until the beginning of this year. Because unfortunately, in the third step, we consider the changed situation since February. We ask, what impact does the Russian war in Ukraine have on the conference? And finally, we will look at the current stage of the process and try to answer the leading question: the Conference on the Future of Europe, is it a real success or is it a fruitless effort? So let's welcome you all again and begin our debate. I would like to start the debate with the question to Professor Hübner, as she's the most experienced guest today in our round, and she's a member of the European Parliament, but also of the conference plenary sessions. So actually, she is situated right in the core of the debate and of the process. And that's why I would like Professor Hübner to introduce our debate with some personal recollection of the origin and the launch of the conference. What do you think? What was the situation 1 year ago when the conference started?
Thank you. Thank you very much, first of all, for the idea of bringing us together. And you mentioned yourself that the previous big dialogue about Europe was exactly 20 years ago with the convention. So I think the time has come to relaunch the debate, especially that Europe of 2002 and Europe of 2022 are very different Europes, if I can say it this way. Well, I think that the conference did not happen because somebody woke up in the morning and had this idea of getting citizens together with other European players, institutions, member states, governments. But it was an outcome of processes which have been taking place for years, I think, in Europe. We could see over those years that with every enlargement, when the Union was becoming bigger, there was a strong need to bring the European Union and citizens closer together. And that was the practice of, I think, communication over the last decades. We could also see especially in the Lisbon Treaty, the strengthening of the citizenship of European Union. We could also see that European Union is not anymore just the union of states. It is the union of citizens, which makes it unique in the world. And that's why we needed also to make this union of citizens really a meaningful process, and that we need a dialogue with citizens. We strengthened the citizens' dialogues already before the last European elections in 2017-18. We had hundreds of meetings. I'm talking here about commissioners, about members of European Parliament, but also domestically organized hundreds of meetings with citizens, discussions on Europe. We had also the further expansion of European movements. Across Europe, there are many European movements. We could also hear from President Macron how important would be to have citizens' conventions. That was later on picked up also by the European Parliament, who received from President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, also the commitment to this conference. And then during the European elections in 2019, we could see across Europe that citizens were raising the same issues, a bottom-up movement of citizens who wanted to discuss the climate-related issues and also the European value-related issues. So we had a kind of bottom-up emergence of European demos, and that's why this conference is just embracing all those processes. So I guess that it was not a surprise that after the elections, the first thing that the European Parliament did, and the Constitutional Affairs Committee in particular, we started to push the European institutions, starting with European Parliament, towards having this kind of debate, which was also announced during the previous years once or twice by President Macron, but never really taken seriously by the Council, by the member states. So the Parliament very quickly adopted two resolutions. We started to organize ourselves, started to talk to the Commission, the Council, which was extremely difficult. And at the end of the day, we got this 9th of May 21, which was the inauguration conference delayed by the pandemic, but definitely starting. And let me just last sentence on this to say is that we sometimes forget that European Union is a democratic construct. And we all remember that Portugal, Spain, and entire Central Eastern Europe, we had to wait to join the European integration process till we changed the system to democracy and market and the economy to market economy. But we followed always this approach, this way of thinking about European democracy in sort of in line with traditional European culture, which is representative democracy. And I think that all those processes that I talked about also justified reaching out to the participatory democracy, seeing it as a factor that might strengthen the representative democracy, because we know also about the internal problems with the respect of European law, with populist anti-European leaders in some European member states. So we needed to have a fresh look at European democracy and see what contribution can come from citizens and from this participatory element of European democracy. So that's how I see the whole beginning. And I think there was no other option, I guess, and we didn't have much in terms of expectations at the beginning, but I think we will discuss it later. So maybe for the very beginning, that would be from me, and the format we will discuss a bit later, I understand.
Thank you, Professor, for these opening remarks. It was interesting to hear because you're in the very core of this debate. So now I would like to shift to Dr. Miankowska, and I would ask her to give the audience an overview, seen from the political science. What is the conference about? What is the format? And maybe including the citizen panels and the plenary sessions and the digital platform, what makes it so special?
Thank you very much for having me at this debate, as it's really, I would say, necessary for better understanding what actually Conference on the Future of Europe is, but also spreading information about that. Because if I could see one maybe most important aspect of let's say problematic beginning of the conference, it would be this lack of information about it. And I'll stay here, maybe I will not criticize this aspect. As a Euro enthusiast, not only a scientist, I should say that Conference on the Future of Europe is an incredible opportunity to embody something that in political science has already been discovered and elaborated, I think, the most by Arend Liebhardt, who has analyzed and compared majoritarian democracy and consensual democracy, which we don't have a lot in this world, probably apart from Liechtenstein, Switzerland, and some tools of consensual democracy. We have basically the EU that embodies this idea or this concept, and not really much else. So if we take this into consideration, and what Liebhardt has actually given a lot of evidences of, this consensual approach outperforms any other aspects of democracy in all possible areas and according to all possible criteria. What does this mean? It means that majoritarian democracy is basically about, voting once a 4 or 5 years, and then leaving the things the way they are, so leaving life to politicians only. In the EU, Conference on the Future of Europe is this effort to give an evidence that the EU is not only about Brussels bureaucracy. It's not only about, European Parliament elections from time to time that used to have really low turnout, thanks a lot of efforts of the European institutions, and maybe also more and more efficient communication policy of the EU, this turnout grows. But basically, Conference on the Future of Europe is this effort to show to the European citizens on the one hand, and on the other hand, to get from the citizens a sort of feedback on how the European Union should look and what it should be more like, I would say, from this perspective of how citizens perceive it. But, I wouldn't be a political scientist. I would be only Euro enthusiast if I didn't tell you about, let's say, problematic aspects of all that. First of all, the question is not what it was designed for, but what is actually the outcome of the Conference on the Future of Europe and what it actually will bring. Because if we only pretend that this is a great tool of gathering voices of the citizens and then of proceeding them, but the outcome will not really be seriously taken into consideration, then this whole effort will be good for nothing. So, it is now a big, enormous responsibility of all those three institutions that have actually launched the Conference on the Future of Europe, even if we know they were quarreling about that. And as Professor Hübner mentioned, it was very difficult probably with the Council. And honestly, the Council is the most problematic here from the point of view of, let's say, interests of the member states. Professor Hübner also mentioned something that I always tell my students on the first, I would say, lecture devoted to the EU. The EU is a unique organization worldwide because it's pointed not only towards the member states, it's pointed towards the citizens, which means that sometimes the member states even disturb in proper addressing, let's say, the interests of the citizens by the EU institutions. And I'm absolutely responsible for what I say. Yes, they are disturbing. And when we see now, let's say, those states that de-democratize strongly, like Poland or Hungary, there are also other states where those processes take place. In Slovenia, we have the problem with the media. In Bulgaria, we have the problem with corruption, and so on and so forth. This is problematic in lots of ways. But when the citizens tell us what they see, what they want, and then at the end of the day, it's not taken into consideration by anyone apart from European Parliament that will put it then into words of some resolution and that's it, then it will be a failure, not a success as it was designed to be. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is obviously that the Conference on the Future of Europe has brought us a lot of wishful thinking on the side of the European citizens. It showed us that there is a lot of wishful thinking in a sense that the citizens would love the EU to take care about plenty of things which it will never be even able to take care for. So the point is how to now translate those wishes, those dreams of the European citizens into the language of political will and at the end of the day of decision-making process. And also taking into consideration the fact that not everything is even possible on the basis of the treaties. So the question is, how now from communication point of view and political point of view, all those three institutions will communicate to the citizens what will happen with those recommendations and why some of them will not even be taken into consideration. So I think this is an enormous challenge that politically may again be something that will decide if the conference will be considered a success or not. And last but not least is what citizens actually have recommended. Because, when you take a look at those recommendations, I took a look at all of them more or less, let's say, thoroughly and more or less in depth. But what I noticed is that we have in the European Union something, I mean, among the citizens, something that is strongly related also with how we plan the outcomes of the Conference on the Future of Europe. Namely, we have this Euroscepticism of former Euro enthusiasts who lost their faith and lost their hope that the EU will actually address the problem of de-democratization, of particularities in the EU, also of external threat, and obviously the Russian invasion on Ukraine has given an incredible evidence of that the EU might not be actually able to deal with all those most important for the Europeans recently threats. Also the climate change, the healthcare. And this is what we can see actually in those recommendations, that it's the last hope of the citizens to really point out what, in their opinion, should be done with all those biggest challenges, even if we know that for the European Union, politically, it's very difficult. And the question is now whether it will be a signal that the member states also will properly understand and read, and if they will also take this into consideration while making individual decisions that they will then consider meaningful in their elections on a national level. If the EU convinces the member states that these things are important to be taken into consideration, and also if they somehow properly address their communicates to those populist parties in the EU member states, and those that might have, let's say, a chance to still win in their countries, like Poland. Well, Hungary's lost. We will see what will happen in France, but we have some other countries actually to deal with. Then the question is whether those institutions will take it seriously, and then at the end of the day, if they have some tools and if they will use the tools to press the member states to really address properly the recommendations that the citizens expressed. But this is all actually just a matter of really a lot of effort of the European institutions, in particular of the Commission, but most of all of the Council. For the moment, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you for this great explanation. It's much easier for the audience to follow all this process if you put it like that. So you mentioned that there are few players like member states, like the council, like the citizens, and you have to connect these people and to connect these players. So maybe we have a closer look at the member states now for the first round. And I will ask Professor Wojciuk, how could you outline maybe the national interests and the situation in Poland last year? What was the relation between the Polish government and the EU, which was a little bit problematic, and it's totally different to the situation right now? So actually, was the Polish government interested in substantial reforms, and what is the position of Poland?
Yes, so I would like to join thanking my colleagues for invitation to this important debate. And I think the first point to make is that Polish society is very polarized. And there are less and less issues on which Polish voters agree, especially the voters divided according to the line pro-government, pro-opposition. And I think this has a major impact on all political issues. However, the EU and European integration remains one of the very few issues which are relatively little polarized. Yes, there is considerably less polarization as far as the EU and European integration more broadly is concerned. So I think we can clearly see it in the data. In the last Eurobarometer, 53% of Poles trusted European institutions, which is significantly more than the average for the European citizens. And only 26 trusted Polish parliament and 28 trusted Polish government. What it shows you? It shows you that even the supporters of the government trust more in EU institutions than in Polish governmental institutions controlled by the party for which they are voting. So I think it produces important implications as far as participatory processes are concerned. Yes, because it shows you that even in if in other aspects, Polish government is representing the ideas supported by their voters, maybe not necessarily as much in the area of EU integration. And I have to say it is despite 7 years of very strong anti-EU narrative in public media. So I think it is a considerable data point showing how pro-EU Polish society is, that even if a lot of government propaganda is accepted by supporters of the Law and Justice Party, not those which are against the EU, and it's a very important topic of criticism. So, Polish government has the idea of the EU as a Europe of nations, and of course, clearly, Polish government would like those voices supporting Europe of nations, limiting integration. And giving more space for domestic law and domestic courts and domestic and constitutional tribunals at home. Polish government obviously would like those kinds of voices to be present in the debate. So what logically follows from that, it's not in the interest of Polish government to start huge consultations with Polish society, because it could be possible that those voices would be very different from the ones coming from official narrative. Thus, Polish government used rather other formulas to show the voice from Poland. It rather used European Party of Conservatives and Reformists, which organized consultations and which allowed Polish ruling party to bring this message. It also used more expert forums because this allows them to control better the discourse. So in my view, Polish national interest is stronger integration and strong participation of Polish citizens in the debate. So in this particular issue, I do not think that the current Polish government is doing the best job serving Polish national interest, but definitely the interest of the ruling party in Poland is to bring to the debate the message that we want less integration.
So it's my right moment to bring Mr. Dr. Ondarza right into this play. Mr. Ondarza, what is the German position on the opposite? Germany is strongly connected with the European narration, and so there's a totally different situation. Could you explain us what was the position of the German government in last year, in 2021, when this conference was started, and what did change after the re-elections in Germany?
Yes, thank you very much, and it's good to be here, and I hope you can hear me all right. I think it's important when looking at the position of the German government on the Conference of the Future of Europe to really say that there was a change with the election in 2021. Before that, the German government, I would say, reluctantly supported the conference, but didn't have a strong idea on what to do with it. To think back, as Professor Hübner outlined, the initial idea for the conference came from Macron and then was picked up by President von der Leyen as a promise to the European Parliament. And Germany, I think it's fair to say, went along and supported the project without being enthusiastic of it. So the Merkel government always said, we are open to talking about reform of the EU. We are even open about treaty change if it is necessary, but it's not a core project of the German government. And I think one case in point for that is the German EU Council presidency in the second half of 2020, which was originally planned to be the starting phase of the conference. And as we already discussed, the pandemic led to a delay of the conference, and it was Germany's task to negotiate when should the conference actually start. And you could see that during my presidency, the German government focused very much on the multi-annual financial frameworks, on questions on how to integrate rule of law and how to fight the pandemic. But the conference on the future of Europe was only a secondary priority. Germany didn't put a lot of political impetus on trying to break the deadlock between the European Parliament and the Commission and the Council on who should lead the conference, and basically push that dossier to the Portuguese. And so only under the Portuguese presidency in the first half of 2021 could the conference actually be started. So I think this really shows Germany wasn't a blockade, but not an enthusiastic supporter of the conference on the future of Europe. Then the new government, which held the coalition talks at the end of 2021, thought long and hard, what do we want to do with European politics? And there they actually, at least in the coalition treaty, have a much more ambitious formula, where the new German government said they strongly support the conference on the future of Europe. They want to make it a success. And they even want to turn it into a basis for eventually turning into a convention on treaty change for further integration in the EU. And therefore, I would say only after the new government changed, the German government pushed stronger on the conference, and is now, I would say, in the minority within the Council amongst the EU member states, which want to do precisely what Renata outlined, so use the recommendations of the citizens to deepen European integration, primarily in the fields that have been outlined by the citizens' recommendations, so on Green Deal, on digitalization, on strengthening the EU and foreign affairs, but also on democratic rights within the EU, for instance, on the question of transnational lists for the next European Parliament elections. So I would say the German government wants to make a stronger push on using these citizens' recommendations to go for a deeper EU reform, as much as that is possible with the current configuration with other member states who are certainly more reluctant to do that.
And may I ask you again, what is the German approach when looking at national citizen participation?
So Germany did two things. On the one hand, Germany organized a number of cross-border citizen consultations, saying very strongly, if we have conversations and consultations with citizens about the future of Europe, we need to take special attention to our border regions. So there were a number of events together with Polish colleagues, together with French citizens, with Belgian citizens, with Czech citizens, even with Italian citizens, so not directly a border of Germany, but really stressing this point that the consultation of citizens need to be at the border regions together with other Europeans. And then secondly, as most EU member states, Germany also made a national citizen forum for the conference on the future of Europe. That took place in January this year, so at the height of the Omicron wave, so unfortunately could take place only virtually. But there were 2 weekends where 100 representatives put together representatively citizens from Germany worked out 8 recommendations that have been feeded into Germany's positions on the conference on the future of Europe, which mirror some of the priorities that I just outlined. So a strong focus, I remember there, on transparency and involving citizens stronger, on sustainability and climate change, but also as the EU as a responsible international actor in its foreign and security policy. So these 2 elements, the cross-border element and then a representatively selected national citizen consultation, in addition to what has been done in any case on the European level with the trans-European citizens forums.
Thank you for that. Professor Hübner, let's go forward and look at the contents which were discussed at the conference. In the second step, we now should ask about the priorities until the outbreak of the war. Seen from Brussels, what is your impression? Which issues were the most in the focus of the conference, And in general, what were the most valuable so far?
Oh, thank you very much. But unfortunately, I have to react to things that have been presented by colleagues, because first of all, I would like to defend the value of the process as such. I think it's not only outcome that really matters, important as it is, and we have always had this option of cacophony or a structured outcome, and it looks like we are having a structured outcome. But I think the process itself was extremely important. I think it showed to the citizens how difficult it is to find agreement among such a big family of very sort of diverging interests and different views. And I think they passed the test, I think, excellently. They took a very high threshold for the approval of their own recommendations, which was 70%, so more than qualified majority, if I can say. But you couldn't hear any national interest in their discussions, in their support or lack of support for some ideas. They also, I think, started the discussion through the kind of typical, probably for many of us, silos type of thinking. So seeing the issues independently from others. And we could see how they were evolving during our meetings and having more and more this feeling, which is the right feeling, close to reality, that everything is dependent on everything else, not only in the European Union, but in the world of today. So I think that that also had a huge, really, value, I think, to also for another reasons, and that's my second comment on the format, because during the conference, it was not like the citizens talking separately and us, all institutions, talking separately. The most important, I think, structured, which was linking us together, is the structure of working group, 9 of which we had, where exactly the recommendations and the citizens, with the citizens holding the pen all the time, coming to meet with national parliaments, European Parliament, representative of the Council, other European institutions, also organized citizens organizations which were not in the panels. And only then they could see that you can have a different view on this. And they were also, I think, having to make decisions whether they stick to their initial version of the recommendations. In my case, in the case of Working Group on Europe and the World, there was a big openness towards taking on board, maybe also because of the war, on which I will just talk in a second, but they were also showing openness to other arguments coming from also politicians. So it was really the dominating, and responsibility stays largely with the citizens, but citizens who are also showing that they can talk with others on European priorities. Now, talking about those priorities and the whole content of the discussion, I think the issue, the major maybe assumption for the conference was that we are not preempting the end of the discussion. We are not preempting the list of issues that can be discussed. That was an open, living process. We are just offering a structure for all of us, and the structure was the 4 panels for citizens, but then those 9 working groups to discuss together. And the recommendations from the panels were focusing on the economic and social issues, then on the constitutional democracy related issues, then on the health issues, also on the investment in research and the importance of I think the clean energy was very clear. And then the last Europe in the world, which was affected, I think, extremely strongly by the war. And around 10, as we see it now, around 10 of the 178 recommendations that come from the citizens' panels, plus there were 300 coming from national panels. But of those, I think around 10 would require a treaty change. That's why the treaty change, which was not also decided at the beginning, we will see how it will be finally decided whether we have a convention and treaty change or not. But I think if you ask me about the priorities before the war, you might be surprised that we didn't need much to change. We just put stronger emphasis, because I think on the economic issue, on needing of a strong economy, of the need of having an economy that is really strategically autonomous, having the economy that is not characterized by strong dependencies, especially on basic raw materials or critical metals, and especially the energy, depending on other not necessarily friendly countries. That was already before the war that we had in citizens' recommendations. There was also, I think, so those issues were extremely important. They were already before the war. I think the fact that we were just after the pandemic was also having big impact on the appreciation of the health issues, and there is a recommendation clearly to make this the health issues and the shared competence issue. And then on the Europe and the world, I think we had already before the war the issue of enlargement, but slightly differently seen. So the war has increased not only the dependencies issues, but also the issue of enlargement in the context of the new requests for the candidate status. There was also, I think, some stronger language on the protection of, I don't even know how to call it, on a well-balanced approach to migration. I think there is awareness in the recommendation that we are entering the era of migration, whether we want it or not, but we also have to balance it well, the policy, defend protect, I would say, the European Union, but also respect all the international laws and the protection of human rights when it comes to migration policy, and the issue of the solidarity within the European Union. That was also clear. What was a bit surprising before the war, which was not changed later on, all the social economy related issues. There was very few recommendations on the economy, the strong economy we need, but there was not much interference into how to finalize the banking union or the architecture of the economic and monetary union. So those issues were not really of much interest to the citizens, but social standards, especially the minimum social standards, also access to affordable energy, access to internet for everybody. This kind of issues that were very strongly in the, and didn't change, of course, in the after the war, when we had to take into account also the war. But what I think the war has definitely strengthened is the security issue, external security issue, and we had big discussions on the army, as you can imagine, with trying to find with the citizens, among the citizens, also a balanced final approach. We had clear clarity that we have to reduce and better organize, though gradually, the departure from the unanimity. I think that was absolutely clear, the unanimity and very strong arguments against unanimity and the end of unanimity, and in the context of the sanctions, and everybody remembered the sanctions against Lukashenko, which we couldn't take. So all those issues also showed that citizens follow, at least those who were in the participating, follow also the real life. Also on taxation, I think the issues were not affected by the world, but everything that is global security dependence, I would say QMV and enlargement and the dependencies. These were the issues that clearly were strengthened in the context of the war. And you might be surprised as well, the appreciation of the importance of the European values, because I think this narrative also looking at what Ukraine has been going through and appreciating the European unity. So in this horizontal kind of approach to the future of Europe, this appreciation of values and the importance of unity and making Europe able to have strong global alliances, that was also very strongly coming to the surface. My personal conclusion was that listening also to citizens, not only to our decisions globally in the context of the invasion of Russia, I would say that truly geopolitical union, I think, has been born, and I hope that it will really stay, no matter how how close we will be with US in the years. Thank you.
So now I want to come to Professor Wojciuk because she has to leave earlier, and now I would like to ask her, what is the reaction in Poland? What was the kind the conference was received in Poland? And could you please distinguish between the government and the opposition, what they made of this conference?
Yes, so generally, in Poland, this conference was less visible than in many countries in Europe. And as far as I know, talking to my colleagues, in Germany it was much better advertised than in Poland. So unfortunately, and I would criticize here both the government and the opposition. And why the government didn't have huge interest in mobilizing people, I already explained. And for the opposition, it's a bigger question, in my view. I must say that, unfortunately, Polish politicians are don't feel, I think, very comfortable in participatory processes. And I even looked clearly at what Civic Platform has done with this regard. And they organized an event in Gdańsk, which was devoted to this particular purpose. And they invited two key politicians who just had a conversation and were taking questions from the audience. So I think this is not exactly what is the point in inviting citizens to discuss. And I believe Polish politicians in the central government still have a lot to think about and to learn in engaging citizens. So the article which you kindly mentioned, which we published with my colleague Wojciech Przybylski in Rzeczpospolita, our aim was to mobilize local governments, because in Poland, actually local governments are the ones which do the best job in terms of consulting inhabitants, consulting citizens, and they are really good in that, at least in some parts of Poland. However, our effort did not bring results, because the article which we wrote was published exactly on the 24th of February. So exactly the day the war started. And even people who are very, very sympathetic to the idea of EU integration told us that it's the worst possible timing, and I think we can all agree. And afterwards, not only the attention went elsewhere, but also Polish local governments are the ones which take the largest burden in terms of helping refugees. So those capacities of Polish governments, local governments, on which we counted, because also Polish local governments have interests in engaging citizens for the EU integration, because Polish local governments, self-governed voivodeships in Poland, they are beneficiaries of European funds. That's why we thought, well, this is maybe it's a good try. Let's try to get them to organize it, to help the citizens. But the timing was not on our side in this respect. So unfortunately, I think in Poland, there was not good enough information about this debate. Neither the government nor the opposition did a good job in inviting citizens to take part. And as far as the government officials are concerned, I know that they tried to organize some consultations using the multilateral format which Polish government is supporting, which is the Visegrad Group and the Intermarium framework of cooperation. So I suppose that there will be some reports published by those bodies and also financed by the Visegrad Fund. So this is the framework, because this framework allows to bring the message of European, of nations. So this is the purpose of the government, to bring this message to the debate. Yes, and from the point of view of engaging citizens, well, I believe it is a wasted opportunity, but I hope that next time Polish pro-democratic, pro-European forces will do a better job in not only providing pro-European message in their own name, but also in bringing Polish pro-European citizens, which we have millions of people who come to protest when the European values are endangered and European integration is endangered in Poland. So you can see this huge support. Unfortunately, this debate hasn't consumed this huge potential in which I really believe.
Thank you very much for this.
Thank you very much.
So, thank you that you have been here. And I will come to Berlin again and ask, is there any new dynamic after the election if you compare these explanations with the perspective from Germany?
Yes, thank you very much. So I would say that there has been a little bit more visibility and attempt to put focus on the conference in Germany than what the colleague just described for Poland, but not very much more. So on the one hand, we had a bit of a public campaign. So at some train stations, there were posters about the conference on the future of Europe and the multilingual platform. But in the national media, I would struggle to recall more than 1 or 2 articles about the conference. So there was only a limited attempt to put attention to it. Where there was some more attention put towards this was the expert community. So in particularly the regional governments, the Länder in Germany, but also the European movement in Berlin. They did a lot of local events or online events talking about the progress of the conference, the discussions there, making briefings about what is being discussed. So trying to link between the conference itself and the expert sort of EU bubble in Germany. And I think that at least worked to the extent of creating a feedback loop. And the third point is that the government with the coalition treaty really put a lot of emphasis more on that conference. As I said, in the coalition treaty, there is a sentence of trying to turn the conference on the future of Europe into a conventional treaty that could eventually lead to a European federal state. And that, of course, made a lot of people nervous. Suddenly, the German government is talking about a federal European state. And I think it's important to stress that this is more a long-term ambition, something for the far future, but still for the first time that the German government said, this is a long-term vision that we subscribe to, and this is something we want to work towards. And my impression is that by that, the German government and the 3 parties making up the government said, we are really attaching a bigger political importance on the conference on the future of Europe. And that certainly increased the attention from the expert community, but also the discussion in Berlin on what we actually do with that. That having said, the war in Ukraine started so soon after the new German government took power that most of its foreign policy has been consumed by reacting to that war. So for the time being, the German government has produced a so-called non-paper, very Brussels English, a non-paper on what the German government wants to do in that conference on the future of Europe. And there no longer is this big idea of the federal state, but really building on some of the suggestions the citizens have put on the table. And if you read through that non-paper, you could see that the German government is picking out those bits and pieces of citizens' recommendations that it also wants to support. So included in that is, for instance, QMV in foreign and security policy. It's the EU as a strong trade power that builds sustainability into its trade policy. It's a new push for enlargement, a new discussion on what to do with the Western Balkans, but also Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. It puts emphasis on strengthening the Green Deal and the digital transformations, 2 big projects of the new German government, but also that have a strong emphasis in the citizens' recommendations. Thirdly, it has an big focus on democracy, strengthening the rule of law, and as I said, transnational list looking towards the European elections in 2024, and still notes that treaty change should be a perspective building upon the recommendations from the Conference on the Future of Europe. So I would say there has been a little bit more visibility, but most notably more government emphasis on what to do with the Conference on the Future of Europe. A final point, my impression is that Germany is quite alone in that. There may be a handful of countries, national governments in the Council who actually wants to really build upon the Conference on the Future of Europe. And there's a larger group of countries, most notable Sweden and other Nordic EU countries, but also some Central and Eastern European countries who, and we can debate that, or at least debatable, who say now is not the time for a big debate about European integration. We need to focus on the matters of hand and focus on the program until the next European elections, and basically only take note of the recommendation of the citizens. And I think a big task for the German government and those who want to push on EU reform, maybe also depending on the result of the presidential elections in France, a big task from them will be to convince the other governments in the Council that for the EU to strengthen its legitimacy, it needs to take serious recommendations from the citizens, which I personally was surprised how well thought through they were, to actually take them serious and signal to the citizens that they're willing to pick them up in the next 2 years until the European elections in 2024.
So, Professor Hübner, do you want to comment on this?
I would like to.
Thomas, I need to leave. I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. We all have.
No, Professor Hübner, and I just want to say goodbye to all of you because I do need to go. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. So I would like to say that I know you can have a critical approach to the German paper, but if you look at the backdrop of the rest, I think some of us were very happy in the European Parliament delegation to the plenary from the support coming from Germany. I also think that it was very disappointing for us that you mentioned other member states that exactly we were very disappointed. So we hope now, as those who would like to see that the outcome of the conference, which I think is more than one could have expected, because I think we have a series of serious recommendations and we have something to work on, that during the meeting on the 9th of May, where we will be kind of finalizing, I hope, this stage of the conference, there will be this clear perspective that now the European institutions will look into the recommendations, and this is Commission, Council, and the European Parliament, and there will be next meeting with all the citizens, with all the stakeholders from the conference after summer, where we will discuss what form and what will be taken on board and when it can be delivered. We also count very much that the outcome will be also some idea of establishing a mechanism of a more structured dialogue on involving the citizens in the decision-making process on the future of Europe. And my last sentence would be that I want to say that I don't remember a discussion on the future of Europe where this famous sentence, which was brought by some member states in the past, that we don't need more Europe, we need a better Europe. This was never said by anybody during the conference on the citizen side. They were actually, all the recommendations are about more Europe. We never heard any statement that would say we need less Europe. So I think that that's really a positive, and my main takeaway from this conference, that people want to have more Europe, but a Europe for which they will feel responsible or will feel that they are also owners of this Europe. That's why we need some form of mechanism that would allow us to engage the citizens in the future decision making as well. So I think I am positive about the conference. As I said, I think we I don't know if we could have reached more, but I think we have reached more than we expected, and I think what was possible. And I'm extremely unhappy that my home country was not really visible during this conference. I can tell you that I participated in many meetings in Poland, which were informally organized by groups of students, by universities, by some international organizations also. And I also participated in Germany in European movements meetings, and also some universities were sort of suspect the academy was really active as probably much as possible. But I also think that European organizations of citizens, especially European movements, have been also strongly involved. It's a pity that governments, only a few, I think 6 or 7 countries, member states, were indeed organized the national panels in line with those general rules that we have established for the national panels. There was, I think, 7 states, including Germany. But all the rest, very few discussions. And that's why I'm sorry, but once again, I'm disappointed with the Council. That should be probably my last sentence. Thank you.
But may I just ask one question about regarding the situation in Ukraine? What is your impression? Are you very satisfied how the conference addressed this topic?
Well, it was quite difficult to convince all these, we call ourselves components of the conference, meaning those who were meeting within the working group, so not only citizens, that we need really to look anew at the recommendations. Most of the recommendations were finalized before the war was triggered, the aggression was triggered. But finally, after 2 or 3 meetings, we saw the understanding that we need to really see what it means for Europe, and that's why I think that the strengthening of the issue of the values of the related to the independencies or dependencies on autocracies, the awareness that there will be the post-war Europe will be part of the global world, which will be divided between the democratic family and autocracy, so we will have to cope with it. And that's why I was mentioning also the issue of enlargement, because we had a very strange statement actually from the citizens coming that we first, in the past we called it the first deepening and then widening. Here it was first, let's consolidate the identity, European identity, and then we will think about the enlargements. And fortunately, the discussion started, and we have managed to avoid this because that would be a very bad, I think, approach for the future of Europe. So there was an opening toward enlargement, not only the Western Balkans, where we have really to deliver because we made commitments, but also to especially Ukraine, but also Moldavia and Georgia were mentioned. So we have to proceed, because this enlargement has been the most, I think we agreed, the most successful policy when it comes to to expanding the space of democracy and for democracy on the European continent. And we just have to understand it better probably now than in the past, because the risks are enormous. And I also hope that the change in to mean that Mr. Putin we will not look at what he will say when we will be making our own decisions regarding also the enlargement.
Thank you for that.
But the unity around the war was, I think, understood as the most important thing that Europe should care about. And I think that was clear. So we need unity. Otherwise, we are weak. Thank you.
And you see the European Union united, yes?
We see absolutely unprecedentedly united and acting very quickly. And I think also able, which was a good sign, able to build global alliances of like-minded democracies. Of course, it was easier now with the current administration on the other side of the Atlantic than before, but still it was extremely important. And the most important conclusion, which probably in Germany you might have different reactions of people, but certainly on the security and on adding to the powers of NATO, also our own power to be used when NATO will not be able to engage. We sometimes forget that not all EU members are members of NATO, and not all NATO members are members of the European Union. So we can have also our own capacities, which is not additional army coming on the top of existing national armies, but the capacity to act. I think that was appreciated, and I think there is an agreement with the citizens on this as well.
And Dr. von Orazza, what is your position on that? I mean, we talked about the turnaround in Germany concerning the security policy and the relations to Russia. Do you see Germany's position in the conference damaged?
I mean, that's a whole new, I think, debate about the German Zeitenwende, the turnaround in German foreign and security policy. I think it's clear that the focus and the change in German foreign security and defense policy is happening outside of the context of the Conference on the Future of Europe. So the three main elements are, of course, the huge increase in defense budget, the 100 billion euros for the next couple of years as extra money for defense spending, the willingness of Germany to send weapons into a theater of war, and thirdly, the support of unprecedented sanctions, even if there are still strong debates on how far these sanctions should go in terms of Russian energy. And these three elements are really a historical turnaround point for German foreign and security policy. But for many EU member states, there's still not enough. And certainly the voices that I hear from Poland are demanding that Germany should do more in terms of defense of the eastern flank, in terms of sanctions, and in terms of heavy weapons sending to Ukraine. And therefore, I think the biggest effect on the role of Germany in that conference is that in the crisis of the last decades, which were primarily focused on economic issues, the Eurozone crisis, the refugee crisis, trying to deal with that. Those were economic issues where Germany was the dominant power. Now we're talking about a situation where there's a huge security crisis, and Germany is still weak on security and foreign policy. And I think part of the question for me is how will Germany's role in Europe change in a situation where we're talking much more about hard security. And even with that additional defense spending, it will take time until Germany has the credibility and also the means to be such a strong player on hard security. And so I think the only sort of effect I can see on Germany's position on the conference on the future of Europe are twofold. The one thing, of course, is that the war takes precedence over everything, including some of the reform ideas that Germany originally wanted to push in the conference on the future of Europe, which will certainly now not be center stage, where all the focus is on trying to handle the war and the changing security order. And the second point that it puts a little bit more on a question mark on the sort of relative strengths of Germany vis-a-vis France, but also Poland and other Central and Eastern European members, how strong Germany is within the EU member states. But I don't think it has a fundamental point, a shift on what Germany wants to achieve with itself.
So stepping back a little bit and taking the conference as a whole, in conclusion, do you think the conference is a success?
The question to me?
Yes.
I would say I'm positively surprised by the recommendations the conference has developed. I think it was a success in developing that method of bringing representatively selected citizens together in a European way to discuss about the future of Europe. But I think the conference itself was overshadowed by the two big crises of the last 2 years, the pandemic and the Russian war. And therefore, the outcome will only be decided by the willingness under these conditions for the member states, but also the European Parliament and the Commission to take up some of these ideas. And therefore, I slightly disagree with Professor Hübner. I think the process itself has been a success, but I'm still more skeptical whether the outcome can actually be achieved that was originally targeted with the conference under the conditions that we are in, where all of the political attention in the EU, but also the member states in the next couple of months will be dealing with the war in Ukraine, rather than some of the reform proposals that have been put on the table by the citizens.
Please, Professor Hübner, you want?
The war and the pandemic, it just overshadowed the whole conference. But I'm sorry, it's horrible what I'm going to say, but without the war, I think the pressure on the reduction of dependencies in the energy sector would probably not be that strong. And I think the war has also underlined or made it very clear what we cannot continue as European Union, and these are those dependencies. And I also that the has taught us that we can achieve more if we are united, because we did a lot of things. It was a hiccup at the beginning during the pandemic, but then we did a lot of things because we were united also, because this virus respects borders and it hits all of us equally. So I guess that we have managed to use the two very negative processes that overlapped with the conference. I think to go further, to move further, and to strengthen the recommendations of the citizens. I think there is a better awareness, better understanding of the challenges we are facing, because we also, I think, see that it is one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council that has launched the aggression and the invasion and all those atrocities, which we all can see today. So that also means that after the war, we will have
some technical problem. Could you repeat the last sentence?
Coming from the sort of well-implemented recommendations of the conference.
And in conclusion, Professor, would it be right to say, let's place the citizens at the center of Europe? This would be your conclusion?
That would be my conclusion. I would like to say, maybe as a conclusion, this one sentence I said. I was disconnected for a while, I'm sorry. That I said before, which is that this conference clearly has shown that what the governments have been telling us for years, that citizens do not want treaty changes, that citizens do not want more Europe. That clearly shows that this is not the case anymore, if that was ever true. So citizens want more Europe. Citizens can imagine that if needed, there should be the change of the treaty. But for us politicians, of course, is to think further and understand also how we can do it in the best possible way. But Europe I think, is getting stronger from this conference, because it has, I think, more support that we used to have from citizens.
We should take this message as a final word from you. And I thank you very much that you attended and we had you, and it was a great debate, and thank you for being here.